Hey everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Tom's Hardware live show for CES and Innovation Week 2021. We are here today with JJ from Asus, showing a whole lot of Asus stuff. As always, I'm Tom's Hardware Editor-in-Chief Abram Pilch, and I'm joined by Managing Editor Matt Safford for this broadcast. This is one of many broadcasts that we're doing this week. In honor of CES and all the really cool products that are coming out. And Asus has quite a bunch. I want to remind everyone who's watching live on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, or Periscope that we're taking your questions live. So please chime in. So JJ, how has your CES been? Have you been getting around okay, finding all your meetings?
Yes, all my virtual meetings, right? I think it's the main thing is like, is it, which platform is it, right? Is it Zoom? Is it StreamYard? Is it somebody doing, Teams, right? That's kind of the main point. And also, like always, oddly enough, right, you have to account for a lot of time zone shifts at CES when you're dealing, I think, with just the end side of us posting information, but here it's even more applicable because we're dealing with virtual calls, so we having to coordinate between different people across the country. But otherwise, everything is going through smoothly, and I definitely want to thank everybody that's tuning in, joining us here virtually. It's glad to have you here, and best wishes to you guys in 2021.
Great. So Asus has released a slew of stuff. I know we had originally scheduled to talk about motherboards, but you've got just a wide range of really interesting peripherals as well. So I guess we should start with the motherboards. What has Asus announced in terms of motherboards this week?
So it's actually been pretty busy. Of course, the big star of the show has been Z590, right? Z590 has been the long-awaited chipset from Intel. It's finally launched, of course, with the initial information as well for the 11th gen series of processors. Before I kind of get into, I think, some of the boards, talking about the stack and some of the cool things that we've done for this generation, one of the things I do want to kind of note on those, that for people that are wondering about Z490, we have gone ahead and already made an announcement, and we have UEFIs in place so that if you are interested in being able to access 11th gen CPU-based support, there will be UEFI releases that essentially will allow for you to update those boards and be able to essentially migrate over if you decide to. Generally, we don't see that many people that usually upgrade from one platform, from the original CPU that's offered on their platform to a newer CPU. But I think for some of the kind of limited segmentation that sometimes do see the value in it, for whatever reason, then that is an option that they will have available. You just have to download the UEFI update and you're going to be good to go. Great thing is, of course, that not only unlocks 11th gen support, but you also have PCI Gen 4. And that, of course, segues into Z590, right? I think the big aspects that we have here, right, is the 11th gen support along with of course, support for PCI Gen 4. We have, of course, higher DDR4 frequencies. Some interesting stuff. I don't know how much conversation we've seen from the community on your guys' end, but you also have the new B&H series chipsets, which for the first time Intel is offering an unlocked memory divider. So you've got actually higher frequency beyond the standard SPD frequency, which is pretty cool. And then, of course, also you have the improvements to the DMI link, right, where you've got more bandwidth there. And then, of course, some of those other additions with the I/O side, right, with USB 3.2, improvements in terms of more bandwidth, and, of course, Thunderbolt 4. And that'll kind of segue, I think, when we start to talk some of the boards about how the kind of the specs have been broken down between the 4 different series that we offer.
Wow, great. So when are these boards coming out, and what's the difference between them? Do you have any pictures of boards?
Yeah, so we'll kind of go through a little bit here of the stack. In terms of kind of the overall relative timeline, we're expecting, I think, our first initial kind of channel availability. And what I mean by channel is essentially just roll out to e-tail and retail. So whether you're kind of going to be going to something like a Micro Center, or you're going to be going to, of course, any of the leading e-tailers, once we essentially get it into our supply chain and then we roll it out to distribution, there's a little bit of logistics time, things like that account for that. But I would expect to start seeing the boards towards probably about the third week of this month, all the way towards the end of the month. And historically, what we do as far as Asus, we usually have what we call a one wave and a two wave strategy. So we'll have probably about 70% of the board stack initially available by the end of the month. And then from there, there'll be kind of some follow-up boards that come along for the ride that are a little bit more kind of specialized in terms of either form factor or kind of some of the specification support. And kind of before I jump into that, I think that's a good kind of segue to kind of establish a baseline. I think for some people, they know, of course, we're the biggest board vendor in the world, have been for 15 years. We've got a lot of different boards and it became confusing. So I think the main thing I want to touch on is that we've got 4 different series. So we have the classic ROG series. That's our highest end series. Easiest way to know that you're looking at a formal ROG board as opposed to an ROG Strix board is the naming convention. So an ROG board is going to be defined by Maximus. So like a Maximus Hero or a Maximus Apex or a Maximus Extreme. We then have the subset that's underneath that, which is going to be the ROG Strix series. That will always have the Strix naming and just the model name. So that would be like the Z590-E. That will be making up essentially the boards that are really kind of more targeted towards, I say, the sweet spot enthusiasts, guys that really care about aesthetics. They want a lot of the advanced kind of features and functions, but maybe not some of the more specialized niche level options that we've got on the highest tier ROG series boards. But they are inherently ROG, and we'll kind of really go into understanding the difference between those two. And then new is going to be the Tough Gaming, right? Tough Gaming is still fairly new to the lineup. We've had Tough for years, but about 2 years ago, there was kind of a really big unilateral shift within Asus to essentially we closed off the previous generation of the Tough product, which was pretty much a single series, the Sabertooth series of motherboards, and we then really opened up an entirely new series, which was the Tough Gaming line, which now has, of course, become expansive across Asus, right? It's everything from laptops to motherboards to graphics cards, headsets, keyboards. It's the entire range of an entry-level kind of first-time gamer-centric product. And then the last is kind of the tried and true stalwart series, the Prime series motherboards, which a lot of people kind of know those by the white series boards. That's kind of one of the hallmarks in terms of the ID. So 4 series for the Z590 launch. We've got boards in each one of those respective series. And I've got some cool kind of photos here to kind of show you and to dive into kind of some of the spec differential and some of the kind of the things that we're doing this generation, which I think change things up from Z490, and then hopefully help to add, some value and some insight. So let me go ahead and pull up an image here so you guys can take a little bit of a closer look and we can kind of dive into that. So, yep, here we go. All right, guys. Okay. So this is actually the Prime series board right here. This is going to be the entry series, right, for the Prime series. And this is really kind of, I think, like a stalwart board. It's really kind of a target focus for us in terms of a lot of people that whether they're doing, gaming, advanced productivity, science and simulation, this board's going to have you covered. It's going to have all the key specs. And it's also the reason why I start off in kind of the discussion is that it's a good kind of baseline because generally from a price point, it's going to, of course, be cheaper than the ROG Strix series and the ROG boards. And pretty much a lot of the advanced features and functions that we put forward for a generation are going to start off on this, and then they're just going to kind of keep getting higher. And so one of the main things, a lot of times there's a lot of discussion behind, of course, the VRM, right? The power delivery for a board. And, when we talk about power delivery, a lot of people always ask, what's the, the power stage or the power design? And one thing I do want to, touch on a little bit is that it's important to kind of evaluate a board, not just purely from a numerical standpoint. So, how many amps are the power stages, or what are the inductors, performance, whether you're using a doubler or not using a doubler, although we don't use any doublers in our VRM design. You want to look at it kind of holistically. The greatest example that I can kind of think of is like a car, right? When you talk about a car, you don't just talk about the horsepower, you talk about the actual transmission, you talk about the body to rate ratio, you talk about the actual controller that's built in there that helps to manage a lot of those aspects, right? And there's a lot of different elements that ultimately combine into giving the performance for that vehicle, right? For that car, and you have to kind of work in them together. And that really kind of goes in line with when we talk about kind of the design and development for the board. The power components are critical, but if you have a poorly tuned firmware, so the UEFI environment that manages all the auto rules, it manages the load balancing for the VRM, whether it's prioritizing current or prioritizing temperature, and even the topology, the trace layout, all those things kind of have to work in concert. And I think that's what we really bring is our expertise at really making sure that we're not just evaluating the power componentry, the thermal design, but we're also making sure that the trace topology, the actual firmware itself, the auto rolls, those kind of things all come together to make sure you got a stable and reliable experience. So whether you want to run like stock or overclock, you're going to get a great experience. And I think that's the important point that I do want to preface. Sometimes there's a lot of conversation on like, you got to buy X board to get X experience. We don't advocate that. Actually, I would say you want to buy the tough gaming board or entry gaming board, or you want to buy the Z590-A, you're going to have a great experience with even the flagship series processor from Intel for 11th gen. Performance, it'll be about parity to what, let's say, the Maximus 13 Hero would be, but there will be a fundamental difference in the feature set, right? Not everybody will need custom water cooling headers that are built on the Hero, or maybe an ESS Saber DAC that's built onto that, right? Or maybe something like our Hydronode fan headers, which is a really cool innovation that we have for this generation. Those are things that are more niche and more targeted, and that's really kind of how you should help to break down your board selection, not come from this perspective of thinking, if I don't get X board, I'm not going to get a stable and reliable system. So that's kind of a good baseline here to kind of start off with the -A. And I know we've got a lot of information there, so I don't know if maybe we've got any questions that might have popped up, or if you guys, of course, have any commentary there. You guys like the ID for this generation, the continuation of the white?
Yeah, it looks really slick. So Donovan asks, will a Z590 micro ATX board be released?
That's actually a great question. So we are not going to be releasing a micro ATX for this generation. Pretty much the vast majority of the lineup and what we see within the marketplace is ATX-based focused. Mini ITX is popular. Keep in mind, we can't go into specific numbers. We are the largest board vendor in the world, and still proportionally, even though it seems kind of mini ITX is really super exciting, volumetrically, it's not even close by any stretch of the imagination. So that's why you see the most diversification and the most design effort being put into ATX-based boards. So we do have a Z490-G board, which is an outstanding micro ATX-based board. And like I said, with the UEFI update, if you want micro ATX, I would say that's your option. We will have a mini ITX with a Z590-I that will be coming in the second wave. I don't yet have photos of being able to show that, but I can confirm for you that will be an active SKU that we'll release. But pretty much everything else that I'm going to be showing you today is all ATX, no micro ATX-based form factor.
Great. Well, let's see the next one. I know we have some folks queuing up questions about the router, so we'll get to that later.
So let me go ahead and bring up here a different board, just so you guys can we can see how kind of the evolution goes. So Tough Gaming here, we'll take a closer look here at the Tough Gaming board. Okay, and here you can see it's got a really nice ID. This generation, we actually are formally launching the brand new ID design for Tough Gaming. So it actually is based on this really strong kind of bold and clean geometry and vector lines. And so the Tough Gaming series, kind of the focus here is to be a turnkey experience, great for first-time builders. It's got a gaming aesthetic design, of course, and gamer-centric functions and features. Now, what do we mean by that? Because, of course, every board could be used for a gaming system, right? Well, one, of course, the audio networking are tailored for that. So it has an isolated audio design, which is something that we, innovated on a long time ago with ROG boards. And, we're continuing forward with Tough Gaming. So for the gaming audio design, right, it's an isolated audio design, and we use a DTS audio suite. So you got some tailored presets so you can customize that to game environments. And on the networking side, you, of course, have the 2.5G networking connectivity, which is nice because that's, of course, going to be a faster specification. And then, of course, you've got Wi-Fi. You've got the Wi-Fi 6 built on board as well. So you're going to have a high-speed based connection that's going to be present. Now, on the Tough Gaming, we'll have two different models. There'll be a Wi-Fi based variant and a non-Wi-Fi based variant. So you do want to keep in mind that, depending on whether you want it or whether you don't want it, that is something to account for in terms of when you're looking at the board specifications, right? And any questions there on the Tough Gaming before we get into the ROG Strix ID?
Nope.
No? Okay, cool. All right. So here I think we're getting into a little bit more exciting for, I think, a lot of people, which is going to be the ROG Strix series. And also we're here, there's a lot of kind of new stuff that we've baked in for this generation that are really starting to kind of segment and only be present on the ROG lineup. So the ROG Strix and the higher end ROG boards. So you'll see right there, one is a new antenna design. So this is an entirely new antenna design, and it complements that pretty much all the ROG boards, with the exception of the -A model, which will be the white variant. You'll have Wi-Fi 6E. And so with Wi-Fi 6E, of course, you have 6 gigahertz in terms of accessible bandwidth, that when you pair that up with something like the Rapture router that we've got on hand here, that's going to give you, even in real world environments, if you're about 10 to 15 feet from when the router is located, you could be nominally looking at anywhere from between about 1,500 to over around 2,500 megabits, right? So that's pretty crazy when you talk about the performance. It's going to be, 2x essentially what you have with a gigabit Ethernet cable, right? That's pretty awesome in terms of being able to have that level of throughput that's built on board. Now, some of the other cool things that you're going to see is that from the kind of expansion I/O, big focus on M.2. We see a lot of people, especially price points. All the boards pretty much starting from the Dash 8, you've got 3 M.2. In the previous generation, pretty much most of the boards were limited to 2 M.2. So here you've got 3. Pretty much starting up and continues to go all the way up until we get to the Extreme Glacial, which will have up to 5. So a lot of M.2 expansion, of course, supported with SATA-based connectivity. Now, one of the really cool things that we've integrated for this generation is going to be for fans. So historically, right, when you build a system, right, and you connect your fans to the motherboard, what a lot of users right now do is that they end up using some form of like a PWM fan splitter cable. And there's nothing wrong with that. We actually pioneered putting native PWM output Super I/O controllers on the board. So if you wanted to put a splitter cable, you could attach like 3 fans to 1 chassis fan header. And that's great because if you had like a front intake that you wanted to be able to go ahead and pull all your air into and have them all controlled and all synced with 1 header, that works well. But if you wanted essentially more granularity and more control, there is a limitation, right? Because essentially you're using that PWM across that splitter cable. You can't uniquely control each one of the fans. And so new for this generation, kind of continuing the tradition of what we've done with a lot of fan controls, is something that we call the Hydra node. And so there's a specialized IC that we've put onto the ROG series of motherboards, and there'll be a small little header that will be on that board that will be denoted by a P. And that P for, let's say, chassis fan header 1 or chassis fan header 2, when used with supported fans that support the Hydra node technology, will allow you to actually access and address multiple fans connected to a single header through a splitter. So this is something I think is going to be really cool. And again, for kind of enthusiasts where they really kind of want a more tailored experience in terms of how their fans are responding and where they're positioned to and how they're making those adjustments, you'll now have the ability so that if you have 3 fans, but they're connected to one of these headers, you can go in and uniquely define parameters of operation for each one of those fans. So this is one of those things that it's kind of hard to look at it from an initial spec perspective, because a lot of times, even I know for you guys from a review perspective, or if you go to like an ETEL website, you put 2 boards side by side, you might just look for the pure number of headers. But it's not going to be that simple anymore, because there's literally a cost increase for us to put this IC on that board to be able to unlock this additional feature set. But we think, again, this is part of the value add that we're putting forth on the boards, which is pretty cool.
Razer 2048S, are the fan headers still limited to 12 volts at 1 amp?
Actually, for most of the boards for the last couple of generations, it's been higher than 1 amp. So, in reality, if you talk about most of the fans that are on the market, that's not really an issue. You can comfortably really drive, 3 fans, 4 fans off of one. That would still be under generally 1 amp. So I don't really think that that's an issue. On the higher end boards, they do have the H amp header, which actually is a high amperage header, which will give you, I believe, actually up to 3. Really, the only type of fan that does something like that, though, is some obscene, crazy kind of like, 3,000 RPM, monster delta, right? Which is really only used by kind of like extreme enthusiasts. For traditional users, for, AIOs and custom water-cooled setups, there's no issues in terms of running that. And all the boards, we really push forward on this. They all have OCP circuitry built on per header. So if in some weird scenario there was something that there was an inrush, right, of current that could cause an issue, the board will essentially stop that in place, and essentially just the fans won't operate, right, because it's essentially exceeding what the header would be able to do. But I can tell you from my setups, trying everything from Noctua fans to gel to gentle typhoons to Scythe, be quiet, noise blockers. It doesn't matter. I've never run into a situation where I can't put 3 or 4 on a header without any problems.
You mentioned that the new header feature has to be supported by the fans. Does that add any cost to the fan production?
There is going to be some. There is going to be some cost that will be associated with that, but I think they'll be kind of I think, factored into the relative cost for those partners. So some partners, for example, like Bitphoenix, will have a Spectre AI-based fan that will be released. And we'll have more and more partners, as we go through Q1, you'll see more partners that, of course, will make announcements that they'll be able to be compatible with this Hydra node. And we have some other kind of cool things that we're baking in. So you want to keep it kind of tuned down the road for some other stuff that might kind of eventually get baked in with this Hydra node technology that we've kind of got built in there. But the important thing to keep in mind is that, from a base perspective, all the fans that you probably have right now, you still would use the traditional method of just a PWM splitter or hub, right? And just have that grouped fan policy. But, the evolution that we see from this moving forward would be using these Hydra node-based fans, and we're going to work with partners to have that be pushed out there. And I wouldn't expect that the cost would be like considerably more expensive, right? The premium fans on the market, I think, is just going to be partners having those as an option as part of their product portfolio.
Right.
Now, one of the other cool things that we've done for this generation 2 is upgraded the audio codec. So this is something that hasn't really been touched too much recently. We were the first ones to actually design and implement an isolated audio design on our motherboards. We had it exclusively on ROG for years. Then it kind of got rolled out to the rest of our boards, and it actually became so popular that it became really the industry standard. Pretty much every other motherboard manufacturer is utilizing the isolated audio design that we developed. And we've progressed it. We've put like DACs along there with premium audio components. But the codec has fundamentally stayed pretty similar for the last couple of generations. Excited this generation, though, brand new ALC codec. There's the 4000 series. So got the ALC 4020 and then 4080. So you're going to find these on the higher end boards, and also a brand new version of the ESS Saber DAC 9018. So you've got higher performing metrics, in terms of THD, signal noise ratio, just the overall kind of the quality and the experience. So it's exciting to be able to say, hey, if you're comparing this to Z490, or more importantly, a couple of generations ago, a lot of times we always compare things from kind of like an immediate perspective. So you guys looked at, of course, all the boards from the last gen, but from a user's perspective, they might be coming up from like Z170 or maybe, X99. There's still people on X58, right? And other older platforms. And so, when you kind of go from the shift arc from that perspective, there can be a huge number of upgrades, right? Like they might be on a board that doesn't even have a single RGB header. Well, now in Z590, the vast majority of all the boards we have are going to be 3 ARGB headers, where like in the previous gen, we had 4, but 2 of them were ARGB and 2 were the legacy RGB standard. Now we've moved that up to where you still get 4, but you now have 3 ARGB. So there's a lot of kind of these little subtle pieces that kind of get baked into that. And lastly, touching there on the sound, one of the other cool things that we've done for this generation too is we've evolved our AI noise canceling software. So we rolled this out actually on AMD's lineup on the B550 launch. And now we also have kind of evolved it for Z590. So we have two-way AI noise canceling. So we can apply our AI-based noise canceling to not only the incoming audio, but also, of course, your default microphone audio. And while, I've got a cool 30 series card on here, and you've got things like RTX voice, which are fantastic, there is a little bit of a performance penalty. It's not much, it's minimal. But in our testing analysis, because we utilize CPU overhead, and there's a lot more kind of free CPU overhead, and doesn't really affect the frame rate, in our analysis, we find that generally from a performance perspective, you can get it same type of noise quality reduction, but at essentially a lower performance penalty, almost no performance penalty. And just like what you would have with something like RTX voice, it's mappable to whatever type of device you're utilizing. So if you've got a USB headset, an analog headset, doesn't matter. You can apply it to both. And that's pretty much available across the entirety of the board. So whether you're talking again about like the Dash A, Tough Gaming, up to the higher end ROG boards, you're good to go. You're going to have that covered.
Great. So we're getting a lot of interest in the peripherals, but we also have a couple of questions about availability of products that I think are already on the market.
Okay.
Adam asks, will the Crosshair Dark Hero get back in stock, or will there be a new X570 lineup?
X570, I mean, it's very solid. There's no real reason for us to update it. I mean, we have done a couple of refreshes. Dark Hero is a pretty new board, and it's actively being put out to the distribution channel on pretty much on a weekly basis. So I'd continue to say just keep monitoring your e-tailers. We did also recently launch a refresh update to the very popular Tough Gaming X570 Plus board. We released the X570 Tough Gaming Pro, which takes that board and just updates it a little bit with a higher end networking specification, 2.5 gigabit internal USB Type-C header, which is really nice and very moderate kind of price bump. It's only about a $20 price bump, but it's a really good kind of strong board if you want to build for, actually it doesn't matter, Ryzen 3000 series or Ryzen 5000 series. And there was one update for AM4 for B550. We came out with a B550 Pro board, which will be slotted right underneath our B550-F board. I think it's $10 less, and same thing. It's got Type-C header, a little bit higher power delivery. It's actually about the same exact power delivery as it would be on the ROG Strix board as well. So those are the main 3 additions. Otherwise, all the other X570 or B550 boards are pretty much market mature, and they're out there. We don't plan any other kind of additional updates because those boards are doing very well, very solid in terms of their specification support. I think before I jump into the peripherals, I do want to touch on a couple of other cool things that we did for Z590. One of the really big pain points that we see for a lot of builders when you go about building a system is memory. And so something that we've worked on for a while, and we're really excited about announcing for this generation, is a partnership with Memtest. So we have Memtest integration built into the UEFI. So on all the ROG boards, the great thing is you'll be able to do is that, we find that there's a lot of times users that when they're kind of tuning a system, maybe for the first time, or they're trying to verify whether there's a pain point, it doesn't sound like that big of an issue, but to tell somebody, go to the website, download the ISO tool, then extract the ISO tool, put that out to a flash drive, and then boot into it. For guys like us, we know exactly what we're doing. But sometimes for first builders or people that maybe haven't done it as frequently, it can still be a little bit kind of confusing how to go through the entirety of that process, where now they can literally just reboot the system, go into the UEFI, click the Memtest option, and they're good to go. And that's now built into the UEFI. So if you kind of add that along with a lot of the other software that we're adding in with the Game First Packet Priority software, the Sonic Studio Audio Suite, the 1-year licensed AV BullGuard software, it's a lot of stuff that we're giving you that doesn't immediately kind of come to mind from a hardware spec, but it definitely adds value. And it's even gone further with another partnership. Ada64 to me is the premier best system utility that exists on the market. It costs you. There are some great options out there like HW Info, CPU-Z. They're community developed, and there can be sometimes, I think, lag time because of that. FinalWire has the benefit of having close coordination with the IC manufacturers, GPU developers, us, on a direct low level. We can provide them super IO data, all kinds of stuff, and there's built-in stress testing, monitoring, all this stuff baked in. You get now a full license to Ada64 if you get an ROG board. So that's, I think, another kind of premium point. You add to that with the Memtest 86. It's pretty sweet that you're going to have that also now included when you pick up the board. So I think kind of our holistic kind of perspective is trying to make sure that not only is kind of the hardware design really positive and really beneficial, but kind of when you're putting together the system and trying to figure out if everything's working well and stable and reliable, that you've got kind of that suite to kind of go with it. And the last part I'll kind of tie into that, and I think works really well, is we continue our AI-based technology. So I don't know if either of you guys have tried out the AIOC, but it was literally a couple of thousands man hours a time that we took, where we literally took a massive data set of CPU. And still right now, no other board vendor has anything like this, where when you install the CPU into the system, what we actually do is, one, we check the actual microcode information for the CPU. So if, let's say, you were to put in, as an example, like a 10900K or an 11th gen part, you put it in there, you've got a 240 millimeter AIO. Once you get into the operating system, we will actually track the actual temperature for that from idle all the way to load. The actual UEFI on a hardware level will then actually assign what's called a cooler score because we're actually tracking the temperature information. We then compare that against essentially a plot curve that we have that's based on the analysis of a huge number of CPUs that we test in terms of the vid tables, so the voltage that you need, the frequency you need, AVX offset information, low light calibration parameters, all kinds of items, and then we'll provide you essentially an overclock parameter for that part based on your cooler's performance. And the really cool thing is that if you're kind of a dyed-in-the-wool enthusiast and you don't want to use software overclocking or even a recommended overclocking in the firmware, you have a full prediction table that's built into the UEFI. You can literally just reference this table of information where it tells you per core recommendation values, the offset information, the AVX offset, your load line settings, every single parameter is blocked out there for you. You can dial it in manually if you want, or click the button and have the UEFI apply it for you, or if you're on Windows, click it from Windows. And the kind of the really cool part to this is that it will maintain training over time. So if even the cooler performance degrades, maybe your ambient temperature goes up, maybe the pump fails on your AIO, something like that. If we essentially see that the temperature performance is tracking going down, will actually bring down the overclock accordingly. The user doesn't have to do anything. It's just automatically adjusted based on the load. So this is a really cool advanced technology that you're getting on everything from like the Dash A board, not on the Tough Gaming series, but on the Dash A, and then on all the ROG boards, so the ROG Strix, and on the higher end ROG board. So I think definitely if you're looking to kind of want to maximize your investment in the board and kind of your hardware, your CPU, and kind of everything along with that, some pretty cool stuff that we've got in there. And the last note that I'll put there is we do use an adaptive base voltage. So some people kind of go through a convention, hey, the motherboards are horrible at giving voltages. A lot of this is kind of, I would almost say, conjecture mythos that kind of has been propagated for years, and it's people that just are using an example from like 5 years ago but haven't actually looked at something, because many actually manual overclockers do things inefficiently. They'll use a static manual vid, which is quite inefficient. It keeps your voltage fixed and locked for the entirety of whether you're at idle or you're an overclock value. An adaptive vid is far more efficient. It works within the curve of the CPU at stock and only will increase it when you go into the your turbo ratios. So it's really actually the gold standard of what you want when you talk about overclocking, and that's what we do by default. And we even also apply an AVX offset. So it's a very cool tool. If you guys haven't tried it out, definitely would recommend. If you end up getting one of these boards, it's a really nice option for you to try out.
Fantastic. So I know a lot of folks are really excited about the router.
Yeah,
It's so big, I guess. What can you tell us about that?
That's this guy right here. So this guy's pretty awesome. This is our new AXE 11000. So this is a tri-band based router. It's going to essentially give you 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and the really kind of special part is going to be the 6 gigahertz. It's the world's first 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi 6E based unit. Of course, this complements with the Wi-Fi 6E that we have on the motherboards. And, like I talked about earlier, that just gives you a huge level of throughput, right? You're talking legitimately between, 1,500 megabits to 2,500 megabits in terms of throughput performance. And the important reason why you need really that much throughput is that you have to remember that throughput kind of goes down over range, right? So you might start off ideally within 10 to 15 feet at a very high level, but by you get to the last mile point of coverage, you could have a drop, easily beyond 50%. So you could imagine if you had like a 400 megabits connection, 500 megabits, even 250 megabits, you might start off at, let's say, 1,250 megabits within your office. But by the time you get to your porch or your backyard, you would ideally still want to be maybe at like 350 megabits to be over what your ISP can to really be able to provide that. And of course, the more bandwidth you have, the more you can serve to more devices, right? But some of the other cool things, as you can see right here on this guy, it's got the RGB. And it's actually kind of functional because it does some cool stuff. You can actually have the RGB mimic the actual load settings for the router as it's detecting it. We have a feature that's called AI protection, where we have built-in firmware that will monitor malicious links. So if you're kind of surfing on Facebook, or if you open up something like WhatsApp, or you got a malicious email that is linking you to potentially to a malicious server, the router will automatically block that link because we're checking it against known malicious servers. And so you don't have to worry about kind of managing that across all your devices. It doesn't matter whether it's a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, or your desktop. All the devices have to go through the router, so they all will have that. And this also does work for bot mitigation. So if somebody maybe came over and they had like a flash drive or like a hard drive that had like a file on there that could take over your system, and it again is connecting to a malicious server, it would get blocked, and the RGB value actually would light up. It would light up to a pattern and let you know, hey, that's going on. Although you also get a notification on the mobile app if that's something you want to be able to have. Hardline, it's important too. This has got 4 gigabit Ethernet ports. It's got 2.5G, which aligns, of course, with all the boards pretty much now having 2.5G, or the higher end boards having, even 10G based connectivity. So you've got that built on board here. This unit does have a 1.8 gigahertz quad core processor. So the last two things I think are pretty cool here that you want to keep in mind that with that is that some people, they want to run a VPN for like anonymity. But when you enable a VPN on a router, you take a performance hit. You'll actually degrade the performance of what the router offers. And so having a much faster processor on here, if you run the VPN client on the unit, it gives you the ability to really maintain a high level of performance. And also a new feature that we did integrate for this generation is AdGuard support. So if you want to be able to have block ads on your devices on the router level. That is now something that's also built in within our app and within the router's options. There's a whole lot of other really cool stuff that we've got baked in for this generation, but definitely if you're kind of looking for the end all be all when it comes to throughput, range, performance, this is of course an option. And the other thing to keep in mind is that our routers, like pretty much everything that we've released over the last couple of years, supports AI mesh. So you can pair these together as well. If you're looking to even be able to have more expansive coverage. Although I'll tell you, one of these units can comfortably cover 2,800 to 3,500 square foot home. So in most situations, you don't generally need mesh in the same way that I would say, like, you generally find that mesh units will offer lower performance than actually these dedicated high performance routers in terms of their speed relative to the coverage. They usually have a little bit better last mile coverage just because you got more kind of nodes to be able to make up for that. But at least in that 80% coverage range, very similar and generally faster and much more feature rich. But if you need more coverage, you can pair them together, right?
Great.
So I know people had some questions on these guys right here. Was there any other questions on Wi-Fi 6E, or you think we're good there?
Yep, I think we're good.
Okay. So this is one of the most exciting guys, I think, for me in a really long time. So we had the original Claymore, which I think I got a stand here somewhere. Yeah. I can show you. This is the original Claymore. So this was a TKL based keyboard. And one of the really cool things that you had with these being, with it being TKL, but also being the Claymore, was that you had essentially an optional unit that was called the Bond. So the Bond gave you the ability to essentially have the numpad be attached to it. And so generally what you find is that people use the TKL because they either want better ergonomics, so they're not putting as much strain from creating separation for their arm, or they pivot the actual keyboard to be in accordance where they might be kind of putting their mouse. And so the really nice thing is that the Claymore gave you that flexibility, but we no longer produce this model. And so we got a lot of feedback that people really wanted us to reintroduce it. And that's what we did here with the Claymore 2. So you still keep the traditional TKL based format, but now you add this guy here, which is going to be the Bond. I'm going to remove this little guard here. We entirely revised the new locking latch mechanism, up to 5 kilograms of force in terms of what it will support. So it's quite a bit more kind of, I'd say, durable than the first generation, but pretty much just docks there in place. And now you have a full traditional, a full-size keyboard. And the great thing is you can put this on either left or right side, no issues in terms of using it on whatever kind of works best for your kind of desk environment. Integrated volume wheel, which is really nice. 4 tactile macro keys that are also built onto this unit. And I think one of the really coolest options, one of the coolest features is now remove the cord, right? Because this is also fully wireless. So it is not only going to give you the capabilities of having USB-C connectivity, which is great because if you want custom cables, you can go that route, but you now have low latency, 2.4 gigahertz wireless built on board. There's an integrated magnetic dock here, which is pretty sweet. So just take out your little dongle right here and you are good to go. And this will all work with our new Armory Crate software, which we've been very active at updating and integrating. So full Asus Aura Sync support across, of course, all our current products. So you can go ahead and customize everything. And you can even control the lighting wirelessly. So whether you're hardwired or wireless, you can make those adjustments in terms of that. There is going to be USB pass-through that's on here, along with USB quick charging support. So that is available to you as well. And I think one of the other really cool things, we'll have to cut to a second camera here to show it to you, but we made a really big change in that most of our keyboards for a very long time only utilized standard cherry switches, right? And for this new generation, we went ahead and we integrated the new switches that we developed on the Scope RX. And the Scope RX is utilizing our in-house based designs, and these are optical. So not only do you have much faster performance, but really the key aspect here is going to be reduction in key wobble and key chatter and overall stability. So one of the things that you'll find by default when you kind of use a mechanical keyboard, although it can feel definitely much better than a membrane keyboard, is that there's a lot of wobble to the actual key itself. It will flow back and forth to get a little bit of chatter. And it's one of the things you kind of just get used to. And part of it's just because there's not a stabilizer that there's in place, as well as the stem. And so when I give you this kind of close-up shot, you'll actually see that we have a hollow design, and we've got 4 points that allow the actual cap to rest on that, and then there's an integrated stabilizer, and this really helps to have the key feel really smooth and clean, along with that optical based implementation. Just works really well. And from an aesthetic perspective, it also works better because it allows us to have, because of the hollow core design, the lighting is very evenly distributed, where on a traditional Cherry, it's kind of top weighted. Part of the top of the key is more lit than the kind of the rest of the entirety of the keycap and the bottom part of the key. So, well, maybe we got some questions here. Let me go ahead and just set this so you guys can take a closer shot here. At that.
So Scott asks, when will Armory Crate Aura be updated?
We actually updated it pretty consistently. Right now we're on version 3.2, and in most situations, there's updates that get released almost about every 2 weeks. I think literally in the last year and a half, we've gone from the original version 2 build to the version 3.2 build. And there's a lot of what I'd call supplemental kind of patch and interoperability updates that get released that are called HAL updates as part of Armory Crate. We also now do have a dedicated dev team that is working on, adding new features and functions, not only for Armory Crate, but also Aura Creator. And so you'll see a lot of stuff coming in kind of 2021. But we revamped the entire installer. It's now unified between Armory Crate and Aura Creator. It's not 2 separate programs. It installs much more quickly. It's very well, I think, tightly integrated. The stability has been really improved upon. So if it's something that hasn't been used recently, you definitely want to try it out. But I can tell you the undertaking was massive. Not a lot of people realize it, but our RGB ecosystem is the biggest in the entirety of the industry. If you account that Armory Crate is now a unified solution for all of our system products, so every laptop that we manufacture, every desktop that we manufacture, our entire motherboard lineup, our graphics card lineup, our coolers, and all our peripherals, there's literally not a bigger ecosystem of RGB. So it's been a massive undertaking to put everything into one application, and then even go through backporting our products like X570, Z390, Z370, B450 boards that we didn't need to. We went back and backported. That literally almost took us an entire year because we were talking hundreds of motherboards. But definitely it is being actively updated. Let me go ahead and see if I can show you this shot here. So yeah, so here you can see we've got the Claymore and we've got the Claymore 2, right? So you can kind of see them paired up right here. And so if we go and let me just show you, just pull off this keycap, right? You can actually see kind of it's hollow, and you see those 4 little points right there. It's a very evenly distribution kind of light there. And then if you look at the Cherry MX, right, you'll see it's quite a bit different. It's very kind of top weighted right there at the top, right? And because of that, those 4 points, that's really what allows it to feel a lot more stable and a lot more reliable. So if you kind of look right there, you'll see that you have those 4 points. Where in a traditional cap, you can see right there, there's only that single point. And that single point allows it to kind of just, you have much more what's called forced deviation. So it has more play. And some people put stabilize in there. They'll put rings in there to try to make them quieter. But the nice thing is inherently, we've kind of redesigned it to not only give you faster performance, but also just a better kind of key feel. So that is really kind of one of the really cool things that you have on the Claymore 2 is that optical switches, wired and wireless based design, onboard profile support, and you of course have the really cool part, which is the bond, right? And for this model, it will come in 2 different versions. You'll have your kind of your linears, your reds, and then you'll also have your kind of more tactile and kind of clicky, you'll have blues, right? And we'll love to kind of continue to get feedback from the community if they want to see kind of continued involvement and evolution within that.
Do you think Asus would ever consider making keycaps? Because I can see from that, the switch there that standard keycaps aren't going to work, and I know
correct, yeah,
love their keycaps.
Yeah, so we actually did a very big poll, and actually market wide, keycaps is very kind of niche. So it's kind of one of those things that it gets discussed, but if you actually talk to the totality number of users that actually change their keycaps that come with keyboards, even for something that a standard is going to like a PBT keycap, it's a very small percentage. It's just not that big. But that doesn't mean that we aren't evaluating. We are actually looking at internal options as far as maybe developing secondary ones. which we've already done. We actually launched PBT keycaps for already some of our TKL keyboards that we had, like the Strict Scope series. So I think it's an option that definitely we're going to look at, and we'll definitely also look to partners, right? And talk to them saying, hey, if you think that there's something that you're interested in, we want to be able to go and grow with this. Of course, we're still a great partner with Cherry, so you're going to continue to have options that if you do have custom keycaps that you've invested in or that you want to kind of have the look and feel, then go for it. You know, we've got our Flare keyboard, we have our Scope keyboard, you know, we've got the Falcon. We have a lot of different options that, you know, you can still go that traditional route. But if you want kind of the benefits you get with here, you kind of need to look at a different option.
So what are those mice? What are those mice you have there?
Yeah, let me make a little room here because we can show off what we got here. But we got some definite cool stuff. So on the mouse side, one of the biggest kind of most popular models that we've had now for a couple of generations has been our Gladius. So this is kind of the quintessential FPS centric mouse. This is the Gladius 2, and it's got that really nice kind of well-designed, balanced kind of feel. And we kind of looked at it, and we've seen continued trends where I didn't personally feel that this was heavy, and for the vast majority of people, I think it's not necessarily heavy, but we kind of went to the board and said, how can we improve upon not only making it lighter, but also improve performance and maintain, I think, a lot of the ethos that we wanted within the Gladius. So some of the things that within the Gladius models that you still don't necessarily see that commonly is one is a detachable keyboard design. So we'll have, detachable cable design. We'll have two versions of the Gladius 3. There's one that will be wired, and then there will be one that's tri-mode, which is, now I think we have 3 or 4 different tri-mode based mice, but you can detach the cable, which that's really nice, right? The tri-mode version will allow you to go ahead and use either low latency 2.4, sub 1 milliseconds. It is out there literally matching the same exact best performance of any of the wireless mice on the market. Or of course, you can go low latency. We do have ultra high reflex-based support here as well. So if you're interested in really having the fastest level of performance from your mouse, then you're definitely going to want to take a look at this. So Bluetooth 2.4 or wired is going to be available to you. The detachable base cable design, which is also nice because it's Type-C, so that if you want to customize your cable, I think I had a custom USB cable around here somewhere, but that's nice that you can swap them out. But one of the other really cool aspects to even the original Gladius and the follow-up was that we had what was called the push-fit socket design. So this is pretty cool. I can do a little bit of close-up here, but all you need to do is essentially remove these little rubber grommets. Once you remove these little rubber grommets right here, you have access to 2 screws. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, we talk a lot about switches for keyboards, but there's different types of switches for mice. And so this has been something that actually has been much more niche in the community, where you had people that would swap out their switches, either to be quieter or just like a keyboard to have maybe a different kind of actuation force, right? And literally as simple as that, by just removing that in 2 screws, I can now go ahead and lift this out. And from there, I now have access, and we have this push-fit based design. So I can show you here on the closer cut. Let me switch over here. Sorry, guys. There you go. But there you can see I've accessed the mouse. Those are your switches. And here are kind of 2 other switches, these beautiful ROG red switches. And you can swap them in there and entirely change that out. It's literally that simple. And for this generation also, the Gladius 3, it's using optical grade switches. So it kind of follows with that work that we're doing with the optical based design right on the Claymore, as well as the Scope RX, where you've got super high performance. Essentially, you're eliminating any kind of the debounce issues that you would normally have here, and just really have ultra high level of performance. The mechanical switches that we in there are rated for 70 million. And we're also, with it being ROG, we're actually doing even a more stringent test above the industry standard, what's called the force deviation between the left and the right. We actually have about 2 times tighter tolerance than the industry standard, so that you have very precise consistency between your left and your right switches. So this is really cool mouse. You know, in terms of the overall design, like I said, it's going to come in both a wired version and in a wireless version. And for the wireless version, the dongle also integrates in there, supports 3 different profiles for Bluetooth if you want to switch dynamically, onboard profile adjustments as well. So really cool option when it comes to, I think, FPS kind of centric gaming mouse, right?
Very cool. I think we have time to talk about maybe one more product.
Yeah.
Because we only have a few minutes left. What What do you think is most interesting to go over? I kind of think that headset looks really cool.
Yeah, so we've actually got two headsets here. This one's actually brand new, just launching right now. It's the Delta S. This kind of follows the ethos with the USB Type-C based connectivity. So this is really nice because, again, you can connect it to your smartphone, your PC, excuse me, your laptop, even your Switch, whatever it might be. The cool thing about this one is that it does have AI noise canceling for the microphone. It's got an ESS redact that's built into it. But this one was previously announced, and it's just now right now shipping, literally just this month. But the new one that I wanted to show you, if I can bring up the picture right here, is going to be our ROG Strix Go Bluetooth. This will be, at least to my knowledge right now, the first actual headset that will give you noise canceling and AI-based noise canceling, not only for the actual earphones, but for the actual microphone. So simultaneously have that both available to you. And it will use the new Bluetooth aptX adaptive codec, which actually will allow for impressive low latency performance, which is great because traditionally Bluetooth, as opposed to 2.4 gigahertz, can sometimes have some latency considerations, but also support a higher encoding rate, which will allow you to have less compression and also just be better in terms of kind of general use for kind of music, videos, as well as kind of games. So let me see if I can bring up the photo here so you guys can actually take a look at it and see what it looks like. All right, yeah, here we go. So there you guys go. That is going to be the new Strix Go BT, and we have this in a 2.4 gigahertz version as well as a wired version. So a couple of different versions depending on your price point or kind of your preferred connection option. But this will be the only one that has the AN noise canceling support for both the headphones as well as for the microphone. And the microphone is built into this unit, where like on some of the other models, you'll find that we actually have dual mics. We have a boom mic, and there's also an integrated mic, which is nice, like on the 2.4 gigahertz model, if you want flexibility, kind of have the better kind of positioning for the boom mic in your house, right, when you're chilling back. But then, of course, if you're going out on the go, maybe you don't really want to have a boom mic attached, right? And it's got a little bit more subtle styling, more compact, foldable-based design. So a lot of different stuff. If you guys are definitely interested, I'm sure you guys will be posting a lot of the announcements that we've had. You guys can also check out the rog.asus website where we've got full postings, including a lot of stuff that we did on the monitors. I didn't know we touched on that, but one that's probably the sweet spot monitor for all of 2020, a lot of people are waiting for, PG279QM, 240 hertz, 1440p, and 240 hertz with G-Sync. So it's a pretty sweet monitor.
Yeah, a lot of great Asus stuff. I urge people to check out our coverage on tomshardware.com. Thank you so much, JJ, for joining us. Thank you so much, JJ, for joining us. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. We are having a few more broadcasts, including AMD, in like 8 minutes. So if you want to keep up with what we're doing, please check us out on Facebook and YouTube. On YouTube, it would be great if you hit that subscribe button at youtube.com/tomshardware. And we will see you guys later. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Take it easy.